What happens when a former child star finally speaks about a part of growing up in Hollywood that many people never saw? For Jenna Ortega, the answer is deeply personal, and her latest comments are giving fans a very different look at the pressure she experienced while building a career at a young age. Jenna Ortega has opened up about going all day without eating as a child star, and the admission has immediately sparked conversation about what young performers can face behind the scenes. But that's not the whole story. What happened next surprised everyone. Fans immediately began asking questions about what led to those experiences, how Jenna viewed them years later, and what her journey through childhood stardom taught her about the entertainment industry. The real story is far more interesting than a shocking headline. It's about growing up under constant attention, dealing with expectations at a young age, and eventually finding the confidence to speak honestly about difficult experiences. For Jenna, becoming a household name came with opportunities that most children could only dream about. But behind the cameras and red carpets, there were also pressures that weren't always visible to the public. Now, her reflections are putting those early years back in the spotlight and raising important questions about what child stars experience when the cameras aren't rolling. So, what exactly did Jenna Ortega reveal, and what does her story tell us about growing up in Hollywood? Let's go back to the beginning. Jenna Ortega's journey into Hollywood began when she was still very young. Like many child performers, she entered an industry where long working hours, auditions, rehearsals, and constant expectations can quickly become part of everyday life. Over time, Jenna built an impressive resume and became known for performances that showed an unusual level of maturity for someone so young. But growing up professionally in front of cameras can come with challenges that audiences don't always see. Her recent comments about going all day without eating as a child have brought renewed attention to that reality. Rather than treating the statement as just another celebrity headline, it raises a bigger question. What happens when children are expected to function inside an adult professional environment? For a young performer, a busy schedule can mean moving quickly from one responsibility to another. There may be little time to slow down, step away, or simply experience an ordinary childhood. But that's not the whole story. Jenna's experience also highlights how complicated the transition from child actor to adult performer can be. The expectations change. The scrutiny becomes greater. And suddenly, choices that once belonged mostly to parents and adults around a young performer can become intensely personal. Fans immediately began asking questions about how Jenna's early experiences influenced the person she eventually became. And perhaps most importantly, her comments have reopened a conversation about the responsibility adults in the entertainment industry have when working with young performers. To understand why Jenna's latest remarks are resonating so strongly, we have to look more closely at the pressures that surrounded her early years in Hollywood. As Jenna Ortega's comments continued to circulate, the conversation became bigger than one surprising statement. Fans began looking at the realities of child stardom and how quickly a young performer can become accustomed to an intense professional routine. For Jenna, acting wasn't simply something she discovered as an adult. She was working in entertainment while still growing up, learning how to balance school, family life, auditions, filming, and the expectations that came with being on camera. That kind of environment can create enormous pressure. What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of focusing only on the headline about going all day without eating, many people began discussing the larger culture surrounding young performers. When schedules become demanding, basic needs can sometimes be pushed aside, not necessarily because someone intends harm, but because the pace of production can become overwhelming. The real story is far more interesting because Jenna's experience opens a window into a part Hollywood audiences rarely see. Fans immediately began asking questions. Who was responsible for making sure young actors were properly supported? How much control did children actually have over their schedules? And what happens when a young performer learns to prioritize work before their own needs? Jenna's reflections are especially powerful because she can now look back at those years with perspective of an adult. Her story doesn't simply revisit the past. It encourages people to think about how the entertainment industry treats young talent and whether the systems surrounding child performers are strong enough to protect them. And as Jenna's career continued to evolve, those early experiences became part of a much larger journey, one that would eventually transform her from a child actor into one of Hollywood's most recognizable young stars. As Jenna Ortega grew older, her career began entering a completely different phase. The young performer audiences had watched for years was becoming a major Hollywood star, taking on increasingly demanding roles and gaining international recognition. But with that success came a new kind of pressure. The expectations were no longer simply about showing up and performing. Jenna was now being asked about her choices, her appearance, her work ethic, and the experiences that shaped her as a person. The public wanted to understand what it was like to grow up in an industry where so much of your life happens in front of cameras. That's why her recent comments are resonating so strongly. Going all day without eating as a child may sound like one isolated moment, but Jenna's reflection places it within the larger reality of growing up as a working performer. A child actor may be surrounded by adults, schedules, and professional expectations while still trying to navigate the ordinary challenges of childhood. But that's not the whole story. Jenna's journey also shows how much perspective can change with age. Experiences that once felt normal can look completely different years later. What a young performer accepts as part of the job may eventually raise questions about whether things should have been handled differently. Fans immediately began asking questions about how those early experiences shaped Jenna's relationship with work and success. And perhaps that's the most compelling part of her story. She isn't simply looking backward. She's helping audiences understand what can exist behind the polished image of a successful child star. But her journey from those early years to becoming a major Hollywood name reveals even more about the price of growing up in the spotlight. As Jenna Ortega's story continues to spark discussion, the bigger takeaway isn't simply one comment about her childhood. It's the uncomfortable reality that young performers can sometimes grow up in environments where work becomes an enormous part of their identity. For Jenna, those early experiences happened long before she became the star audiences know today. She eventually built a career defined by major roles, critical attention, and a level of fame that few actors achieve at such a young age. But looking back can change the way those years are understood. What happened next surprised everyone as fans began discussing the importance of protecting young performers and making sure their basic needs are never treated as secondary to a production schedule. Jenna's comments have encouraged a wider conversation about the responsibility of parents, production teams, and the entertainment industry when children are working professionally. The real story is far more interesting than one viral quote. It's about growing up, gaining perspective, and finding the confidence to talk about experiences that may have once seemed completely normal. Jenna's journey also reminds us that behind every child star is a real person who still has to grow, learn, and figure out who they are away from the cameras. Her success today doesn't erase the challenges of her early years. Instead, it gives her a platform to reflect on them and encourage people to look more carefully at what happened behind the scenes. So, what do you think about Jenna Ortega's comments? Should Hollywood do more to protect young performers from intense schedules and pressures? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more Hollywood and celebrity news. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.